Welcome to the Stone Carving and Lettering Takeaway. I'm Charlotte Howarth, a letter carver.
And I'm Nina Bilby, a stonecarver.
So how are you, Nina?
Do you know what? I've had some health issues with picking up bugs, Charlotte. I've been very proficient at picking up a consistent number of bugs. And so I've been a bit under the weather the last few days. But today I feel much brighter, and always brighter to see you on the computer screen and have a little chat with you. And I hope everyone else out there feels a bit brighter if they listen to this. Yeah. So how about you? Let's turn it on to you.
I'm good. I've got a very busy few weeks ahead of me. I've got quite a few deadlines and things. So I've got a lot on to get through.
As always.
I know. I look forward to the day when I'm not very busy.
You know how that sounds, don't you?
No.
No. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there going, I should be so lucky.
Oh,
yeah. Be so lucky.
Well, I've got no self-awareness. We all know that.
I'm glad you're busy.
Oh, and before we go any further, just a reminder that we are running our Abraxas Academy Summer Carving School for Stone Carving and Lettering in the fabulous Bradmore Woods this year. And we still have spaces if anybody's interested. Then the dates are September the 2nd to the 5th. It's 3 days, 3 nights, camping, glamping, fabulous location, fabulous food and fabulous tuition. That's with me and Nina. If you're interested, just go look at our website, Abraxas Academy. And if you've got any questions, do drop us a line. But it promises to be a fantastic few days learning in a really fun environment with everybody we've ever taught us loved that location. So have a look if you're interested in our summer school this year in September.
We are pushing through our summer, aren't we? Looking forward to things on the horizon. And we've got an amazing guest today.
We certainly have. We had a really wonderful conversation with the artist and sculptor Michelle de Bruin, and we actually talked for far too long.
I know, we just kept chatting, didn't we?
Yeah.
Regardless.
One of the brilliant things about doing this podcast is we get to speak to people we've always wanted to talk to, and our conversations are so exciting to us because, of course, we're all interested in the same things. It can sometimes go on for far too long. So the upside for us is we get to talk to all these amazing people, but the downside in this instance was because the conversation went on for so long and it was so much fun, we didn't actually do a proper end. So apologies, because we didn't really give in the podcast Michelle the opportunity to say her thank yous and goodbyes, which we know she wants to do. And we didn't properly get to thank Michelle for such a wonderful discussion.
Yeah.
So it does have a rather unprofessional ending. It just
a little bit abrupt, but the conversation was so wonderful, and she was so generous
and inspiring,
open and inspiring. And in fact, I was looking back this morning, knowing that we were going to chat on last podcast notes. I keep notes, and I had reams of stuff and loads of stuff that I was really interested in. Not just about stone carving, but about art and practices,
creativity
and influences, and about sheer bloody mindedness when you have to just make stuff. And she was just so brilliant about that whole thing, and just through and like, I had to slow down when I had my children. I mean, what a statement. Slow down. She hardly slowed down at all. So I think she's incredibly inspiring to anybody out there who just wants to do this for a living. I think she's brilliant.
Yeah. So anyway, here we go. Michelle de Bruin, sculptor, and we know you as a stone carver. Welcome to the Stone Carving and Lettering Takeaway, and thank you so much for agreeing to be on our podcast. We're really thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you for asking me. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's brilliant that you said yes. I hope the money went into your account.
We normally start off by just asking people what got them interested in carving and stone, and what was your journey, the early pointers that you can identify that took you into stone?
Okay, so I don't really come from a background in which I was particularly material orientated. So the background really is that I was a child who was always drawing and making things out of anything, and loving art as well. So, you know, in the first place, you know, all the sorts of things that come to your attention when you're a child, like Giacometti's sculpture,
Yes, yes.
Calder's big mobiles, and, you know, all that kind of thing that's really obvious on the surface when you go to a big museum in London. And so in the first place, the real love is sculpture and just art in general. The paintings of Paul Klee and Kandinsky. So a great love of art in the first place. And then I went on to art school and I did sculpture at Glasgow School of Art. And when I left, I simply continued to draw and make things, bring stuff into the world. So how I've come to stone is that sometimes, you know, sometimes an idea is the informing thing with me. The idea is the informing thing, and it will take me down a path materially, which may occasionally be stone. So the first stone carving I made was in a little sculpture symposium that Glasgow Sculpture Studio ran when they first set up in Glasgow in 1988. And Katagiri, a stone sculptor from Japan, came along and sort of helped us set up this stone carving symposium. And we had a lot of reclaimed sandstone block from an old building that had been demolished in Glasgow. And about 10 of us went and worked on site and all made these perfectly dreadful stone sculptures, really. So that was good fun. But since then, obviously, it wasn't as if I thought, oh, it's stone, yes, I love it, you know, because the idea has always come first, and the idea still does come first with me. And it's not, I don't think it's really in my nature to sort of premeditate the outcome of a piece before I've been thinking about all the things that I'm thinking about. So the sculpture is always a reflection of my current obsessions. Sometimes it's casting things, and sometimes it's just collecting ready-made objects and putting them together. And it often is a collection of stuff that I put together that interacts with each other and forms a kind of dialogue. And sometimes it's an idea that turns into a stone carving project. That's how I've come to it. But I think there's a rigor. There's a rigor in bringing an idea into the world in which you don't want to do it badly. The craft has always got to be the rock solid base of it, even if it's just a craft of putting some bits of string and some wax together. You are still going to have to craft that thing when you bring it into the world to do the idea justice. So that rigor is something that I bring to a stone carving if the idea takes me into a stone carving direction.
I hadn't realised that you worked in it was one of my questions, what other materials do you work with? I wasn't sure if you worked in a wider range of materials or it was just predominantly stone, but it's quite interesting to hear that you do work in other materials. What was your training in terms of learning to carve and materials, just general understanding materials, how to use them, because that rigor really is quite difficult to get without training. Some people think it's exceptional that people get there without some form of training. I'd just be curious to hear what your journey was there.
So I think I have a kind of theory that if you have an idea, or you know what something should be looking like, that takes you quite a long way down the route of achieving that thing in a material sense. So, you know, if you're trying to cast something out of plaster, you're quite quick to pick up on the fact that it's got air bubbles in it, for example, and that it's not doing what it should be doing, that it's not well finished, that you haven't mixed your plaster properly. And any sculpture that you make, I think I'm always just sort of pushing the ideas in a material sense, and of course that's a really complicated negotiation, because you think, oh, I'll try making this sculpture like this, and then the material simply doesn't do what you want it to do. It will do something.
We all know that feeling.
Yeah.
The clarity of direction we had in our head suddenly collapses.
Yeah, but at the same time it will do something. At the same time it might be doing something that surprises you. So at that point I think there's a brinkmanship between sort of finding out what that material did in that process that you used at that moment, and thinking, okay, that's interesting, but is it what I, is it sort of, is it helping the idea and what I wanted to say? And if it's not helping, if it's not helpful in that situation, in what you are trying to speak of, then you can maybe just quietly, that thing that you made will sit there and maybe come into its own when you're following up a lead for a different idea at some point. And then you might sort of, be poking away, and all of a sudden, at the idea, and then all of a sudden you will do something, and the idea will suddenly grow up and away from you and achieve a sort of little independence of spirit of its own. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for something that I've made which is somehow illustrative of what I've been, thinking. It's never an illustration. It's something which has grown legs of its own and grows away and apart from me. So what I think is that that material ability and learning is that, there's a sort of adjacency there. If you can bring something into the world in one material and know what it is to learn and where to go and get the advice from, that takes you a long way forward. So when I started to make public art, one of the requisites for that was that it should last for 100 years. God knows why, but a lot of people want that artwork to last for a long time. And often it was an appeal for stone as well. Or in an environmental sense, you might want to bring stone into the area that you're working in, or onto the building that you're working in, because there was a history of sandstone in Scotland. It's often sandstone in that area. And I used to go around to the stone yards and go and talk to the masons and go and talk to the carvers, if there were carvers in those sheds. And I'd simply point out that I wasn't sure if the stone carving, if the cold chisels that I'd bought from the stone merchants were doing the job adequately, because I could see that I wasn't getting a crisp cut. And then they would, which was quite entertaining, really, because I was a 20-year-old girl going into a stone yard and literally asking the stone carvers to show me their tools. Which often caused a lot of hilarity, as you can imagine.
I think we've all been there. We know exactly what that environment is like.
And of course it was a long time ago, because that was the early 90s when I first left art school, when I graduated, and I started getting public art commissions, and I suddenly had to find out how to do some carving. And I was working in Glasgow sculpture studios, and some other sculptors around me had a lot more experience working with stone than I did. So what I would do rather than try and bring the thing into the world on my own is that I would gather a little team of people around me so that I'd have some other artists there. But they were artists. They weren't stone people trained in stone. I think it surprised me years later when I'd done a sculpture project in which I really had to ramp up my stone carving skills, which was natural history, the broom cupboard.
Yeah.
And I had to really ramp up my stone carving skills to achieve that. And I did it out of sheer bloody mindedness, because before that I had always worked with other artists, sort of bringing a bit of material knowledge up to the level needed and no further than that. Not like the sort of people that I came into contact with when I started when I started getting attention for stone carving specifically, which was about 15 years ago when I carved the broom cupboard. I was amazed. I was amazed at the level of interest from the people that I regarded as the real crafts people.
That's funny, isn't it?
The ones that had been trained, and to be honest, occasionally even looked down on me because I was simply doing it with no training. Can you imagine the audacity?
Yeah. It's extraordinary. So when you got the broom cupboard, you entered a competition for that, like you would have done any other public sculpture, and you suggested they did stone carving, or did they come to you and say we need these 2 things carved or 4 things carved?
No, what happened was that I'd done public artwork for many years, and then it was in about 1999, because I'd won a big millennial commission, the millennial ones that were going about the time for 2000, and at that point, well, the organizers weren't great to work with, and I made a decision to walk away from public art because I think for a long time I hadn't felt as if I was really satisfied with the sort of compromises I felt as if I was having to make all the time. It was probably all my own fault. Perhaps I just wasn't good in a committee situation. I certainly
think public art has got an awful. I think you're right there. I think there's a lot of compromises. I would echo that experience. I think unless you've got an international reputation where they just want to have a piece of like Anthony Gormley or something, my experience is that, it's like working to commission in a way, isn't it? You're rarely...
Yes, very much, which in a way is nice because of the collaborative aspects in that. So I'd walked away from the public art, and actually I was pregnant with my second child, which was swiftly followed by a third, and I decided to take... I just thought I'd take a little break and simply concentrate on the children, thinking that it wouldn't matter actually if I didn't focus on my career just for a couple of years. Of course, it mattered terribly because whilst I was taking that break, I was sort of losing some sort of sense of my own identity and losing contacts and
confidence, all of that. Yeah.
Confidence, everything. Yes, Nina. And when the third child, so I worked a bit, but really I only properly got my time back when the third child started school.
That's quite a break, isn't it?
That's a long time, isn't it?
It's quite a break. I think I got very little work done for about 3 years. And then I started working secretly on my own by myself at home. A little bus would come by at 8:30 in the morning and take them away to the
to dreamland. Night. See you later. Mummy's going off to do lovely things now. Thank you.
Yes, it wouldn't bring them home till 4 o'clock.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
So good. Just for the term times, of course.
Yeah, that's the downside.
So did you have a workspace, or were you working on the kitchen table then? What was your domestic or work setup?
So I was just at home. We've got a garden and a bit of a shed, and and a kitchen table, obviously. And so I think on the first day that happened, I sort of made myself a cup of coffee and tidied up the house. And then on second day, the kids went off on the bus. I made my cup of coffee, and I was so out of touch with my practice that I thought, if I stop and think about this, it's going to be I can make it really difficult to get started.
Talk yourself out of it rather than lean into it.
So I wandered around the house, and by chance I found a headstone that I'd replaced in a church.
Lying there under
just knocking about the house. Leaned up against the sofa. We had to move the sofa. I was like, what's that? Oh yeah, that thing we put clothes on.
Tiny little headstone.
Yes, it was the most rubbish idea, really. I've still got that headstone, but I'd removed it from the churchyard and replaced it for some friends because a council lawnmower had knocked a chunk out of it. So I noticed this piece of stone, and I dug out, and I went down to the shed, and I found that some rusty old chisels there, and so that was a chance thing, because those things were simply to hand in that moment. In that hour, there they were. And then by chance, a friend had given me an armadillo, which was a sort of bit of Victorian taxidermy.
Wow.
Oh my God, it was a real armadillo.
Loves taxidermy.
So it had been hollowed out and sort of had a little silk lining with its tail and its mouth for a little basket.
Oh my God.
This is Nina's heaven.
And so
not the process or the decimation of the armadillo population in the global environment. However, a Victorian armadillo handbag, it sounds like you're describing either a potpourri, something you'd put lavender in and having next to the bed. I mean, my mind's going now. What?
I know.
What was it for? What was it for?
Yes, exactly. Why?
What was it for?
And also, I felt that it was a baby because
it gets
quite
worse.
Small. So,
oh God!
And so just sort of in that hour, the little armadillo was still on the table from my friend. The headstone was in the garden. The rusty tools were in the garage, and I just started, and I took the tail out of the mouth. I just drew it on, and I carved the whole thing in a very sort of in a relief carving onto the headstone, and I carved it with scales and everything, just with complete rigor, no sense of style, just a sort of
an observation, like an observational drawing, but three-dimensional observational drawing in a sense.
Yes. Just for the sheer sake of doing something in that moment and getting going, because there's a sort of in the making of something, that's when your mind actually starts to free itself up. If you're sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, just thinking, it's no good. You've at least got to be drawing.
Yeah. I always think creativity is a bit like a field path through a field with a gate at the end, and if you don't constantly walk through it, there's no path. You have to keep moving through it to keep the path well trodden and easy to use, so that there's a clear sense of walking or making, or ideas can move through. But the minute you stop, the path is overgrown, and the first efforts to get back, you have to fight all this other stuff that's overgrowing. And the more regularly you do it, the easier the path is to walk. But the minute you stop, it becomes overgrown and harder. For me, that's how it feels.
I always think creativity is a neural pathway. So I learned algebra at school. I wasn't very good at it, but I learned it and I understood it. There are things that you do, especially as you get older, that whole kind of staving off dementia thing, our creativity is simply a neural pathway that has been opened, and you continue to travel it. Yes. And it, like you say, the blood flow goes to that neural pathway, and you become more receptive to everything and anything around you. And then suddenly a crumpled piece of tissue on the headstone that's casually laying in your front room, which is very strange, Michelle, just so you know. is you know, even for me, that's a bit odd. It's suddenly an incredible piece of material and needs structural investigation. Like everything becomes a tiny story in a local newspaper, a kiddie walking past the gate dragging a dog that doesn't want to be walked. Everything is suddenly food for the neural pathway, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And the more you use it, the more useful and more joyful it is to use it.
Yes. And I think also if you haven't been making anything for a little while, there's also a very confusing sort of build up of ideas that you've you know, there's a lot of little threads that have gone through your mind in the space of a month or two in which you haven't been working. And then when you try to pick up the thread and regain a sense of direction, you don't know which thread you're picking up. But when you're in the thread, when you have started doing something, it then becomes more obvious to you which direction you are going in, because you can't physically do more than one thing at a time. And so the most important thing of a moment is simply to start. And so after I did the armadillo, I continued to work in secret from home, not wanting to go back to public art, which would have been the financially sensible thing to do. And panicking, obviously, because you can't have 3 children without panicking about money, because some must be earned. And one day I randomly just applied for a research and development grant, which the Scottish Arts Council did at the time, and they paid for a year.
Wow.
And that was the start of the broom cupboard. I promised nothing to them when I applied for the grant. I simply pointed out that my situation was that I had been completely professional and and busy making public art and completely independent for the entire space of time since I had left art school, and that following a break, I needed to simply reset somehow, but that it wasn't easy to do that mentally when I had 3 children, and sort of trying to because you can't help but conflate the fact that you're making something with the idea that it should be sellable. Really, you need to be able to simply think about the art first, instead of being muddled up with ideas about whether it's going to be practical and where you're going to sell it. And so that was the start of the broom cupboard, because in the first instance, I did nothing but read books. I was reading books about semiotics, actually, and reading about the science of recognition and how you read the signs of things. And so I was reading a lot of philosophy and books about semiosis, and then I started looking at natural history collection and taxonomy, the naming of things and the ordering of things, and then I just thought, well, I'm just going to, because there's a craft to it, and I think it was the idea that there was a sort of craft of seeing and then a craft of thinking and ordering things that provoked me to sort of go down a route of compiling my own natural history collection in a sort of that was very heavily crafted. So I produced these very overwrought carvings, and it was an entire collection which were animals that were indeterminate somehow, after a tradition of natural history collections being built by individuals with an interest in one specific area of natural history or not. I sort of started curating specimens which were indeterminate somehow, even if they were indeterminate for a childish reason, like being a flying fish. So it wasn't a sort of, it was a complete mixture of reasons things might be indeterminate, so just looking at the ways you might think that you might always put whales in the same place as fish, in your brain, because they live in the sea. It doesn't matter how often anybody tells you it's a mammal. Still in the sea. It's still in the sea compartment. So I carved this ridiculous installation, which was full of creatures that were indeterminate somehow. Like I had a platypus, which is the classic one, and then there were other things like mud skippers, a little fish that hops about on the beach and things. And they were all on or in packing cases and stuff, and that's when I got my reputation for stone carving. And people came to me and started commissioning me to do more stone carvings. And do you know what? It did work perfectly, because it was easy to work with those private individuals who were just commissioning stone carvings from me. Much easier for me, more appropriate for me in my not very good at committee ways to just deal with those private individuals. And of course the stone carvings kept me, that those commissions kept me in my workshop, which is where I wanted to be, because I was making my own work, and I could be making my own work, and out of the corner of my eye there'd be a commission. And then in those moments when you're stuck with your own work, or you've just sickened yourself by making so much rubbish, you could just turn away from it. You could just turn away from it and just do some carving on someone's commission. So that works for me.
And you were award. Am I wrong in thinking that you won an award for that collection of work? Is that the craft award? Did you get a craft award specifically for the broom cupboard, or the work that developed from that?
Yes. So yeah, I did. I won a prize. It was, oh dear me.
Was it the Innis Carr Craft Award? Was that something?
That was a grant that I applied. That was a grant that I applied for, so that I could buy some Portland limestone, actually, because I'd won a prize, which was a travel award for the broom cupboard. And I went to Florence and Chicago and Washington to to go and look at some taxidermy.
Amazing. This is post the broom cupboard. This is not during the construction of it. This is post it.
Yes. It was a different thread. I did a whole little project in the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, which was a slightly different thing. And then, but it did come off the back of the broom cupboard. Obviously, your ideas are evolving, and probably to the detriment of my career, I very rarely stay in one place. I never continue to carve more of something because it's popular and it's selling somehow. I'll sort of try and move forward to the next idea and bring something new into the world. So the Burgess Shale project was a different thing, and that was also a carving project, because I was still aligning a sort of craft of seeing and a craft of thinking and a craft of doing in the most primitive way I could imagine, and stone carving is a perfect vehicle for that. It's perfect. It's transparent in its obvious nature, because nobody can possibly mistake the way that a stone carving has come into being, in the same that you might be confused about how a cast object has come into being. Object is the materials are opaque somehow. They don't declare themselves in the way they've come into being in the same manner that a stone carving does. A stone carving is very obvious, is a very obvious, transparent thing. Everybody recognizes a bit of stone when they see it. We're surrounded by it. And then when it's carved, it is conspicuously that material that you are so familiar with, and it has just been worked by hand. And so I tend to think, in a sort of material sense, to me, that is a transparent material.
True, it's true to itself. It doesn't hide behind, unless it's gilded or painted, I suppose. It's
yes.
I've been doing a lot of research at the moment about I don't know why, but I talk a lot to the students that I teach about coveting skills, and liking work.
Yes.
So especially in carving, you can like someone's work, but what you like about it is the skills that have been engaged to make it.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to like the subject matter, and that's very confusing, I think, when you're a maker. You can sometimes get really seduced by your envy of material processes, and you can think, oh, I'd really like to do that, but actually you could just be responding to the subject matter, or you're just that it's quite rare actually that you respond to both together. I think it's a complicated thing, isn't it, looking at materials and looking at art. But what I've been reading about recently is the kind of medieval aesthetic of materials, and how in the late medieval period, well, maybe like 12th to 14th century, truth to materials, actually the response to materials was honest. But when you move into the Renaissance period, it's all about trying to make a material look like something else, the illusion of the material, like if you think about Donatello or Bernini or what have you, making marble look like flesh. Whereas in the medieval period, the stone and the wood, you recognize it as flesh because it's a familiar, it looks like a person because it's got a head and arms and it's wearing a cloak, let's say. But it's not flesh because of the style and the way the material's been treated. And I think stone, wood and stone, but particularly stone, it's really interesting when you start using it and manipulating it. That thing we talked about earlier on about having in your head what you think this thing should look like, what everybody else takes from it once you've done it, that kind of separation. I've just talked around in a huge blank circle, sorry, but I know exactly what you mean. It presents itself to you as a piece of stone. It does. But some stone makes you think, wants you to disbelieve what you know is true. And I'm telling you, it's actually flesh. And it's that kind of like Paul Daniels smoke and mirror. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's an interesting material, isn't it? Because it can mess with your head. So that was a bit of a weird one, but that's only because I've just been what you were saying is like totally resonating with me and bouncing off neurons, and I'm like, yes, but what if it's flesh?
I very rarely, but in fact, I think that what I find quite interesting from a craft perspective about the way a lot of stone carvers work is that there is a concern somehow that in the carving you shouldn't mess it up, and your skill set should be such that you could maybe just sort of reproduce a bit of carving from the model that's been made, and that is a sort of skill set of its own. And I'm not entirely sure that I have that because it's not something that I'm particularly interested in, and it's not really a skill that I've cultivated. A favourite misconception is that I've somehow sort of carved the bit of stone with some sort of preconceived idea of a perfect outcome in my mind, and that I could have broken it along the way or made a mistake and that it's gone wrong. And I never do that, actually. I nearly always carve free.
So you don't have a model? Do you draw? Would you have the scale of the block on a piece of paper somewhere and plot perhaps where to start, or do you just go bang in?
It depends how important it is. I might very loosely, I might have a little bit of a model so that I can fix the idea of, like maybe just this very small blobby clay thing that I've shoved together very quickly. I might have something like that so that I've got the three-dimensional object in my head, the flow of the planes going round the thing. So if I'm struggling to envisage that on paper, blob together a quick clay model, and then I'd probably if I've got the block, I would probably I would start it off like a mason, even though my masonry skills aren't great, but I have learnt some, and so I would start with a template, and then sort of square it off, and then and kits down. But I'm, you know, if it's really just a carving for me, I'm very, very happy just to carve free completely.
Very familiar feeling to me. But sometimes for me, the like, I don't know about you, but stone is quite expensive. It can be difficult to come hold. You know, like you've got it in the workshop. I have to overcome the fear that I might just end up with nothing.
Yeah.
And it can be a bit of a stoppage. Like, oh, you know what? I'll just do it in plaster because that's less expensive and less precious and blah blah blah. And I think because I was institutionalized at some point into the kind of craft of masonry, etc., I sometimes really struggle with the word waste. It's like, I don't want to waste that. It needs to be worth, like exactly what you're saying. It needs to have a future. It needs to go somewhere. It might need to make me some money. And it's a discipline to allow yourself to fail, isn't it? And to kind of know that you're probably not going to, but I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to risk this. I'm going to have a go.
Yes. I mean, in a way, I sort of, the way I allow myself to proceed is actually by completely accepting the possibility that I will make bad art.
Well, you make very bad art very successfully.
I find that incredibly liberating as well. You know,
it's lovely to hear.
It's a complete reframing of how you can approach something in your workshop, because it's taking the fear away. I think it's very difficult to do that for commissions, but if you're working on something for yourself, the idea that you can completely take away the fear of failure, of being rubbish, of it not working out, and it's a bit like play actually then, isn't it? You know, it's a really wonderful way of thinking about doing something.
Can I ask, Michelle, do you have, so you had the Victorian collections as a theme, let's say it's a theme. Do you have themes of things that you're interested in, and then you work through how you want to express those themes? And so, like you say, the materials suggest, the theme might suggest a material. And how far do you go? You go until you feel you've expressed that, your response to that, and you're done.
I feel as if it's very rare that an idea is just actually done. You might have made one sculpture, you know, you might have made one installation out of that idea or something, and then it will immediately almost lead to ideas for something else you want to, that the making of that has suggested to you. So you know, I do have a sort of obsession with the natural world, in a you know, and about our relationships with animals, especially and all my work about animals is from a very human perspective. So I've turned that around recently since COVID. I've started turning the animals in a direction in which I'm making installations with lots of blue pangolins, and really that work was really about thinking about how we'd sort of lost all sense of innocence about the planet that we live on, and how far removed we are from you know, imagining that we are with and of nature, and of, you know, and that the animals are our friends in any sense. So I started modeling blue pangolins out of clay and casting them out of plaster and painting them blue, almost like giant, you know, in a sort of, to make them reminiscent of those plastic dinosaurs that you bought from the Natural History Museum when you were a child, and then I put them together on some astroturf with some plastic foliage and a plastic bay tree from the garden centre, and melted down a little plastic tea set that I still had from the children, and dissolved those things into plaster and painted them all up. And so it was very, very colourful, and it wouldn't have been appropriate to carve those things out of stone, because anything that is carved out of stone immediately speaks of craft and the hours spent, because the stone is bringing a different conversation into the mix there. So if you don't want people to talk or think about the craft and the hours for a project, then you simply use something else, a material that's more opaque in its nature. So yes, I'm still quite obsessed with animals. The elves in my head keep telling me to come back to doing more work about animals.
The pangolin work I found really interesting because of their scale. Their kind of toy-like scale.
Yeah.
The collectability scale of them I found really seductive. Is that something is that deliberate, that they're domestic in scale? There's something that you like, I'll come back to that word again, covet. They draw you. You are drawn to. I would be drawn to them, to touch them, to pick them up, to own them.
Yes.
And so that was it. That was definitely intentional, obviously.
Oh, very much so, because I was thinking about being a child, and how before that hierarchy of things has entered your head, and you imagine that you don't think that you're better than those animal toys that your parents have given you. You think you're all equal. You imagine, you started on an equal footing with all these things, and you make them have that tea party on your bedroom floor in an incongruous scale, even though all the animals are at a scale that's incongruous with each other. And so when I was modeling the pangolin like a plastic dinosaur, I scaled it up so that, because you know how big the plastic dinosaur seemed when you were little.
Yes.
I had to scale the whole thing up so that it was proportionately larger, because we are proportionately larger.
Yeah. It's interesting things happen when you do that. And when I remember talking to somebody who was doing a portrait of someone. We were talking about doing the portrait in different scales, and how incrementally small. There's the scales that you put, if you do a portrait or a live figure of a certain scale and you put it in a room, it can become very sinister, like shrinking an adult to a certain size. Then if you shrink it too much, it becomes too fragile and too much of a doll. And then there's that scale where real things, real life proportions of things can almost stay the same, and yet the frame of the body can shrink. And what that does, I think scale is such a fascinating conversation about, like you were saying, what we are. You enter the world of giant, or you can enter the world of actually creepy horror. There's this weird mixture, isn't there? And like getting it right is quite tricky, actually.
You do, because obviously when if you are working on a model for something, so very occasionally I've had to make a little scale model for a client, for a commission. And, the commission might be, I remember once I had this 2 meter tall pink kangaroo car. And I'd made a very small maquette. It was only 50 centimeters high proportionately. But of course, this is how pointing up accurately often just comes. It is often just a complete disaster, because obviously, yes, obviously, if you're looking down at something at a very small scale, not at all the same as looking up at something at a huge scale. I made the maquette beautifully and I cast it for him. But when it actually came to cutting out the stone, I gave it a lot of wiggle room, especially in the angle of the head, because it needed to be looking as if it could see you. That was one of the first projects that Josephine Crossland helped me with when she first came as my apprentice, which was 10 years ago.
How did Jo come to you? I mean, and how do you like training? Are you going to do it again, or?
Well, what happened was that I became increasingly busy with stone carving commissions in my new career as an accidental stone carver.
I love that.
then I found that I was so overwhelmed with commissions, and to some extent that is still true, that it was pushing out my own sculpture, which I wanted to be making. The commission money is meant to be buying time for me to spend in my studio making my own work. So then obviously you can't give that work to anybody, because there are so few people around who are really carving at your level. So you can't pass clients on to somebody who you don't feel is really that good. And the people who are good, are actually busy anyway. So there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go there when you're too busy. And Jo came to me. She was one of those people who asked if she could learn a bit more about stone carving. And she was working as a conservator in Edinburgh at the time, mainly cleaning things. And whenever anyone asks me, I'm not very precious about it. I simply invite them into the workshop. You don't have to pay me, really. You can just, if I'm in the workshop working, you can come in and I'll give you a bit of stone and a banker. I'll show you which tools to use, which is one of the most vital things, really, and how to sharpen them, and just enough instruction to get you started. I won't be standing over you because I'll be working. But I will help and give advice. And she did that. And then we started a sculpture and we really got on immediately. And then we started formulating a plan in which it would be great if she could somehow leave her job and come to me. But, then you're in that trap in which you can't afford to pay someone who's not really that useful, really, and who's going to slow you down of a day. And then at the same time, that person can't afford to leave their job because they can't be paid. And we discovered that Historic Scotland, it's called Historic Environmental Scotland now, did this amazing craft fellowship scheme in which they would give a craft bursary to somebody like Jo who was wanting to learn a traditional building skill, and they would simply pay her every month, but she would be posted out with me. So I don't get paid for teaching her, and she was obviously slowing me down in the first instance, but I didn't think that mattered, because the idea really was that we would just work on her skill sets, and I did actually give her work, like real job, to do herself from scratch, from start to finish. So she might spend a long time doing a house sign or something, because I'd be asking her to respace or redraw the letters several times over. Then she would spend ages carving it, and then I would whisk over the finished
People
thing.
who haven't taught like that, probably, we say this, it slows you down and it costs you money. And, when I look at all the sort of government apprenticeship schemes, I think they have no understanding of how craft skills are learned and taught, and the amount of time and investment it takes to get somebody up to speed, because all that work you do helping somebody is actually far longer than just doing the job yourself. That's what's so amazing, isn't it? In the early days is, you could do the job in a house name, a couple of days, but it can take weeks to get a less experienced person to the point where you need that.
Yes, and of course, I didn't know how to explain to Jo what I was doing, because I'd never been taught. That's
one of the things I was really interested. If you've not had a formal training, how did you find passing your skills on? How did I
didn't know the terms for things. I didn't know about chopping and chasing. I was doing it, but I wasn't there's a sort of vocabulary that you have to develop when you're articulating something. So I found it extremely difficult to articulate what I was doing.
Do you still work with Jo?
Jo and I still work together. We share the workshop in fact we used used so much of the corner of the walling shed that Mark, the owner, let us work in, that he ended up building a purpose-built carving shed for us.
Oh, wow.
Yes, in the yard.
Oh my
How
God.
fantastic.
And so we work together all the time. You know, jobs come in. We're both busy. And in fact, I think in the first place, so Historic Scotland paid for her for 2 years. And, you know, and obviously she was becoming more, you know, better and better the whole time. She was always fantastic because she's fantastically talented. And she's got that eye, you know, she's got that eye that gets you halfway there. And so there was a worry, really, that I probably had enough carving work to keep 1.5 people fed, but I probably didn't have quite enough carving work to keep 2 people fed. So that was a bit of a worry, and we came up with a plan, and we did all sorts of things just to try and ramp up the business. And also Jo learnt how to do masonry with the masons at the stone yard, because there's full of masons, and the owner of Hutton Stone, Marcus Payne, he sort of helped out by giving her the odd pallet of stones which simply needed to be dressed. So you could because just having the income stream and the ability to earn money in your workshop is terribly important. Not to let her have to drift off and sort of go and get a job in a fish and chip shop. You know, we wanted her to be right here with us, so that we had a proper good carving business.
Sounds like a really great relationship, firstly with you and Jo, but also that relationship with the quarry, with the Hutton Stone. Sounds really mutually beneficial. So you get the advantages of being, you know, there's all the lifting and handling equipment, there's people on hand to, is that how it works?
Yes, it is. We're so fortunate, really. We can't really overstate how fantastically useful it is to
brilliant.
Be at Stone. And in fact, I think it's, well, I hope it is. I hope Hutton Stone think that.
Sure they do.
I don't think they would have built you a shed if they didn't like you being there. So much of what you've said, I've written so many notes, resonate. Well, I know with both Charlotte and I, but I'm at a particular point in my career where these things are very important. And it's just fascinating hearing how you've naturally been focused and committed, and you've prioritized your work and your drive to be an artist without compromise, in the sense, like, you're not working in a fish and chip shop. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I just admire that, and I think it's so inspirational for people to hear. It's especially inspirational for me to hear at this point in my career, and it's just wonderful to hear how you develop ideas, etc. You know, you speak so eloquently
with
about
great clarity as well. I think you explain your thinking process in a really nice way. It's just very
accessible and
really nice, nice.
Well,
I'm just going to ask if you have any top tips you'd like to share. We're sort of moving away, but anything, I think she already advice or tips or anything for people who might be learning or listening?
Yeah, I would say definitely don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Do it. Do something. Doing something is better than doing nothing. Spend time and allow yourself to make bad art. Remember that bad art is better than no art. And
I've got a question we haven't quite covered. I'd like to know, do you draw every day? Is that something, so you just draw when you want to work something out?
Yes, I draw.
I mean, sketches and sketchbooks.
I draw intermittently. When I'm exploring something, or maybe I need to look at something to learn the shapes of something, and then the drawings or the paintings they don't even appear to relate to the sculpture and the outcome. they will simply be like a form of note taking in various states of being finished. In fact, in my sketchbooks, quite a lot of my sketchbooks, disappointingly to most people, I think, are actually quite often just full of writing and just random notes. And just to confuse people even more, I think if anyone looked through my sketchbooks and tried to decipher the notes over the years, sometimes I even write things down that I particularly hate or disagree with.
Brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. Does that exercise them from you? Does that get rid of them? Does that like take away all of their agency?
Yeah, it's a sort of note to self.
I absolutely hate full fat yogurt.
This makes me angry.
This makes me angry.
Yeah. So first bring the thing into the world. That was the other top tip. Bring the thing into the world. Don't prejudge the thing that you're making yourself. Don't even try to judge it when you've made it. Bring it into the world. That is your only job as an artist. It's for other people to judge your work.
That's really good.
Not for you.
So bring it into the world. Don't overthink it. Get it out there. Let it tell you whether it's worthy of being around.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that today. I'm very grateful. Thank you very much for saying that out loud, because it's a brilliant.
Yeah, it's been a very uplifting conversation on all levels,
really
Michelle. Thank you so much.
I think there's going to be a lot of carver makers out there who are going to be scrabbling around and making all sorts of bad art today when they hear it.
Let's have a bad art day.
I might have a bad art day a week at least.
Yes.
I think we should,
like a bad hair day.
Like a bad hair day, a duvet day, and a bad art day. Brilliant.
Yeah, sometimes they have more than one bad art day a week.
That sounds good to
me. I'll admit it now.
Better to do it. That's what you said.
Michelle, I'm going to bring us to a close now. That was brilliant and so generous of you to give us your time and also to be so open with your thought process. It's just fascinating to hear. Thank you.
Well, brilliant conversation. Thanks to Michelle. Sorry we cut you off.
Michelle.
Yeah, when you hear this. So inspiring, and it was a bit of a ambition of mine to talk to Michelle. I'd been following her on social media for some time, and you and I were a bit familiar with her work, weren't we?
Yeah.
But it wasn't until we spoke to her that I realized how accomplished she was. And often I think I am Southern centric sometimes. There's this kind of community of people working in certain parts of the UK that I'm more familiar with. So for me, it was wonderful to talk to somebody who's had sort of a glittering career in a sense, with all the awards and the commissions that she's done. And it's just so wonderful to share her with people who may not have discovered her.
We'll post her website links onto the show notes.
Yeah,
and people can go and have a look at her work and delve into the fabulous carvings that she's done themselves.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we loved that, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We've got a couple of things for the fitting room today.
Yes.
I've got the first thing is a book that you had showed me, Nina. Then I'd completely forgotten you'd showed me.
Oh no!
And then I discovered it and I was so excited and showed it to you and you said, yeah, I've already showed you that.
Which one is it? I forgot.
It's Sharp by Sean.
Oh, that's very good.
Sean Hellman.
Right.
It's absolutely brilliant and doesn't actually cover tungsten chisels, but everything in that book is very relevant to sharpening all tools. Lots of people struggle sharpening tools. It's a real skill. It's something we see again and again with new carvers and beginners, is the inability to get a really nice sharp point or understand how to adapt the tip of their chisels to suit the materials that they're carving on. And it is something that comes with experience, but it is also a very important skill within our work. And I just thought, when I got it, I know you showed it to me first, but it's just an unbelievably brilliant book for anybody who's interested in tools or making. So if you haven't come across it, it's called Sharp by Sean Hellman. Again, we'll put the links in on the show notes. And if you're interested, you can go and buy a copy directly from his website. I think it's about £25 plus
Yeah, it's not too
P&P.
bad. It's quite a big book.
It's a big book
Yeah.
with incredibly detailed information, photographs.
Must have taken a long time, I think, to put together.
A long time to put together, but very, very carefully thought out from learners and improvers perspective. You know, there's a lot for me and you to learn, and we've been sharpening chisels and things for many years, but my eyes just lit up when
for me, it didn't overcomplicate things. I think people can overcomplicate the process for stone. Now, for wood, I absolutely understand why that process needs to be a little bit more complicated and thorough and more long-winded. But I think for me, it was really interesting to look at some very simple checks and balances when you're sharpening. And I think that's brilliant when you're starting off.
Yeah.
Just a few, and some really good suggestions of makes and models of different things to sharpen your chisels on, which I really enjoyed reading.
Yeah, it's a really lovely book, Sharp. And then my second...
The second one I'm more excited about, to be fair.
The second top tip.
Yeah, no disrespect to Sean, because obviously it's taken you years to put that book together, but Charlotte came to me with a tip that I would say she was joyful in the telling me of this tip. Go on then, share with the world.
Well, it really is a showcasing of understanding how a carver's mindset can help with everyday tasks in life. And I like to make everything homemade in my kitchen at home. So there's lots of parallels for me with cooking and making and cooking and carving. And I had made some ice cream for my husband, who has a very sweet tooth. And I don't know if any of our listeners have ever made their own homemade ice cream. It often is much harder in the freezer than the stuff you buy in the supermarket. You can alleviate that by adding alcohol. So I have in the past added little bit of gin or vodka, and it acts like makes it into soft scoop. The problem I've had with that is my husband loves ice cream and he eats it for breakfast. And if he's going out on a drive, I just can't allow him to eat the volumes of ice cream he might do if it's got vodka in. So anyway, the other day he pulled out the ice cream tub and the very hard ice cream was in the kitchen table. And he was helping himself to some ice cream. And I said, I'll have a bit if you're having a bit. So I got my spoon, a dessert spoon, and we were sort of scraping little bits of ice cream from the surface of it. And he looked at me, because he's very possessive of his sweets and puddings. And he said, I think you need a smaller spoon. And at that point, my carver's instinct kicked in. And I thought, of course I need a smaller tool. Carving with a big tool into a hard surface is never going to take away very much of the material. So I went into the drawer and I pulled out the very tiniest teaspoons that we've got, a little tiny weeny teaspoon that was my grandma's, about a third of the size of a normal teaspoon. And I pulled it out and I showed him, and I could see the look of satisfaction on his face until...
You took out a massive chunk.
I dug the spoon in like a point and took out a huge chunk of ice cream, and it made me laugh so hard.
He was like, no, this isn't how it should. That's not what I meant.
Not what I meant. And so I just thought it was like a little, people are always talking about how your mental health feels good and you have to write or notice the wins that you have in the day.
That was a big win.
That was a big win.
Brilliant.
So top tip, we all know as carvers that we need a small tool or a point to remove large quantities of material.
Yeah,
it also applies to homemade ice cream.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Carver's mindset.
It is applicable to anything and everything in your daily routine.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it for this month. We've got our next guest, very exciting guest now lined up for next month. Yeah. So what we like to ask everybody, if you enjoy the podcast, is to subscribe. And if you think your friends or co-workers might enjoy it, please do let them know that they can download and listen to all of the episodes. And if you've got any questions or queries or anything, you can email us. Details are on the show notes.
They are. That was it. Yes. So have a fabulous week, and we'll see you next month. And happy chipping.
Happy chipping.
Bugger.